The sound of distant trains, the scent of ashes still in the air, and the silence of a place where hope once lived. Spring 1944, a small, broken train station in Cassino, Italy. Captain Arthur McKinnon, a man who had already lost everything in Warsaw, arrived with nothing but orders and a letter from a brother who never came back. He expected ruins. He expected silence. But what he found was her, a woman sitting alone between shattered suitcases and forgotten dreams. Teresa Alvarez, a librarian far from home, left behind by her own people, but still holding on to a wooden trunk full of books and something even heavier, the will to help, even when the world had given up on her. This story is not about battles. It's about what remains when the noise fades, about strangers who meet in the middle of chaos and somehow find something worth holding on to. Welcome to the channel. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, join us. Subscribe now and turn on the notifications to help keep every memory and every story alive. Without further delay, let's get straight to the point. Arthur McKinnon didn't just wear a uniform. He wore memories, the kind that stay with you long after the world stops making sense. His coat was torn and heavy from the road, but what truly weighed him down were the things no one could see. The broken skyline of Warsaw, the voices that once filled his home, now lost to the wind, the sound of falling walls, and the single helpless moment when the roof collapsed and he couldn't reach her, his wife, buried somewhere under what used to be their life. Now he walked with two things in his pockets. In one, a sealed envelope from high command, likely another mission with no promise of return. In the other, a small medal of St. Stanislaus, given by his mother before the war began. She told him it would keep him safe. He hadn't believed it then, but now it was all he had left of her. The train station at Cassino was nothing more than twisted beams and scorched bricks. But there, among the dust and shadows, Arthur saw something unexpected. A figure sitting alone near a pile of old luggage. She wore a faded blouse stained from soot and travel. On her lap, a notebook half filled with scribbles that seemed to drift into silence. Her name was Teresa Alvarez, a volunteer librarian from Chile. She had come to help organize letters between soldiers and their families. But the war had different plans. Her superior had left her behind, saying she was no longer fit for field service. Too old, too gentle, too slow. Arthur saw none of that. What he saw was someone who didn't belong in the middle of destruction and yet somehow fit in perfectly, like him. There was something in the way she stared into the distance, as if looking for a piece of herself in the ruins. Arthur had seen that look before, in his own reflection. A quiet ache that no words could carry. A kind of strength that isn't loud but unbreakable. She greeted him with a tired smile. One of those smiles that say, "I'm still here, even when everything else is gone." They didn't speak much at first, just shared the same air, the same silence, the same stubborn heartbeat that refused to give up. Later, Arthur learned that Teresa had brought more than books in her wooden trunk. She carried journals, drawings from children in refugee camps, letters from soldiers who never returned, and poems written in the margins of military reports. She said that stories were sometimes the only thing that kept people together, that even if a place falls, memories can still rise. Arthur hadn't cried since Warsaw, but that night, sitting beside Teresa while the wind blew through broken glass, something in him softened. He pulled out the letter from high command. For the first time, he didn't open it right away. Instead, he took out the medal from his pocket and placed it gently on the table between them. Teresa touched it like it was made of gold. Then she told him something he never forgot. "We all carry something, Captain. Some carry weapons, others carry names, photos, or broken promises. I carry words, and you carry all of them." That moment didn't end the war. It didn't fix the ruins or bring anyone back. But it gave them something just as rare: connection. And in a place where everything was falling apart, that was more than enough. Teresa Alvarez had always believed in stories. She grew up in Valparaiso, Chile, in a small house filled with the smell of ink and old paper. Her father was a printer, and her childhood was marked by pages instead of toys. Maps of faraway lands, novels of brave soldiers, and dusty history books that spoke of courage, loss, and resilience. So when the war spread across the world, Teresa didn't just watch from a distance. She volunteered, not as a nurse, not as a soldier, but as a librarian, an archivist, someone who could give order to chaos, one letter at a time. No one expected her to actually go. She was over 40, quiet, gentle, and had never even left her country before. But she said yes, and she meant it. Her mission seemed simple: organize lost letters, recover personal documents scattered by battle, and help keep families connected through words when nothing else could. But war doesn't always welcome good intentions. When Teresa arrived in Casino, she was greeted with silence, smoke, and shifting orders. The officer in charge glanced at her once and decided she wasn't needed. "Too old, too close to danger," he said, and just like that, she was dismissed. Left behind at the edge of the conflict as if her purpose had been erased. She stayed anyway. Alone in the ruins of the train station, surrounded by wounded soldiers, shattered crates, and memories no one spoke of, Teresa sat down with her notebook. She opened it slowly, like opening a door in the middle of a storm. And then she wrote, not for anyone, not for duty, but for herself. Her pen moved with quiet defiance. She whispered the words out loud as she wrote them, like a prayer to stay grounded. To resist is an act of love. Those were the words she had read in books for years. Now they became her truth. Teresa had no weapon. She couldn't heal wounds or carry heavy crates, but she could listen. She could remember. She could write down the names of those who still mattered, even if the war had forgotten them. Some soldiers called her La Señora de las Cartas, the Lady of the Letters. They would give her notes meant for home, bits of torn photographs, or messages they hadn't had the courage to send. She treated each one like it was sacred, folded with care, marked with a name, stored in a box she kept close, just in case the day came when they could be delivered. There was a strength in her that didn't shout. It simply stayed. The men around her carried visible wounds, wrapped arms, broken legs, bandaged faces. But Teresa carried the other kind. The kind that didn't bleed but still hurt. The kind you collect quietly, one sorrow at a time, until your heart feels like a battlefield too. Arthur noticed it. He saw how Teresa never turned away, even when stories got heavy. He watched her sit beside soldiers who couldn't sleep and ask about their homes instead of their scars. And somehow, in that broken place, she made space for something war often forgets: humanity. One evening, as rain began to fall softly on the roofless station, Teresa lit a small candle and began reading a letter aloud, not to anyone in particular, just to the night. It was a message from a soldier named Mateo, written to his mother back in Cordoba. He hadn't been able to finish it, so Teresa did. Her voice was steady, even when the words trembled. And as the rain grew stronger, others gathered around her, men with tired eyes and silent stories. For a few minutes, they weren't just survivors. They were sons, brothers, people. And Teresa, she was their witness. In the middle of wreckage and war, she reminded them that they were still worth remembering, that every story mattered, even the ones too painful to tell. Arthur McKinnon had learned to keep his gestures small. In war, everything became mechanical. How you walk, how you breathe, how you offer a cigarette to a fellow soldier without thinking twice. So when he saw Teresa sitting alone by the platform wall, he did the same. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded tarp, and handed it to her with barely a word. It wasn't kindness, not really, it was habit, a quiet routine in the middle of noise. But Teresa didn't take it. She looked up, smiled gently, and declined with a nod. Grateful but steady. She didn't seem offended or afraid, just grounded. Arthur said nothing and walked away. A few minutes later, he spotted her again, this time kneeling in the mud beside a wounded man. Only it wasn't one of theirs. The uniform was German. The soldier's face was pale and his breathing faint, barely more than a whisper. And Teresa, with her notebook open and her knees in the dirt, was writing down his words. In Spanish. Arthur stopped. Something inside him tightened, not from anger, but confusion. Why would she do that? Then the soldier coughed once, gripped her hand, and slowly closed his eyes. Teresa didn't move right away. She finished the sentence he had started. gently tore the page, folded it, and slipped it into her coat. When she turned around, her eyes were full of tears. Not dramatic, not loud, just there, real and human. And that's when Arthur understood. She wasn't lost. She hadn't been abandoned by accident or left behind without purpose. She was exactly where she needed to be. In the middle of rubble and ruin, Teresa was doing what few dared. She was remembering everyone, not just the heroes or the names carved in stone, but also the forgotten, the misunderstood, even the so-called enemies. She saw people where others only saw uniforms. Arthur felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity, not the kind that asks questions, but the kind that wonders what keeps someone going when the world has already let them down. He had seen bravery in many forms. Men who charged into gunfire, medics who stitched wounds without blinking, officers who carried burdens no one else could imagine. But this quiet woman with a notebook and a calm voice had just shown him a different kind of courage. A soldier might hold a weapon, but Teresa held something heavier: memory. She didn't just witness war, she absorbed it. One name, one letter, one last word at a time. That night, as the fires in the distance dimmed and silence returned to the shattered station, Arthur looked for her again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about orders or survival. He was thinking about someone else, about her. And though neither of them said it out loud, something had begun between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. The kind of bond born not from peace, but from shared ruin. That night, the wind howled gently through cracks in the walls of what used to be a storage room. Now a makeshift bunker lined with sandbags and dim lanterns. It was cold, and not just from the weather. There was a certain kind of cold that came from days without laughter, from nights filled with unspoken grief. Arthur knew it well. Teresa sat near the corner, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, scribbling something in her notebook by candlelight. Arthur watched her for a moment before speaking, his voice low, careful, almost unsure of itself. "I want you to come back with me," he said. She looked up, puzzled. He stepped closer. "Back to our post in the hill," he added, pausing as if weighing every word. "Stay with us. Be whatever you want. A translator, a librarian, a friend, or..." He hesitated, then smiled. Not from confidence, but from honesty. "Or a wife." Teresa blinked, not out of shock, but out of something deeper, something tender. Arthur kept going. "We have men up there who can't read anymore. Their hands shake too much, or their eyes are tired. And we've got letters, hundreds of them, from mothers, sisters, wives. No one to read them, no one to answer. And there's silence, Teresa. Too much silence." He took a breath. "I don't know how to live with joy. I've forgotten how. But maybe we could learn. Together." There was no dramatic music in the background, no sweeping moment of passion, just the sound of war humming softly in the distance. And two people sitting in its quiet center, trying to find something that still made sense. Teresa didn't respond right away. She stared at him, really stared, as if seeing him for the first time, not as a soldier, but as a man. A man offering not a promise of safety or romance, but a chance to not be alone. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Then slowly, quietly, she smiled. Not a wide smile, not one shaped by habit or politeness, but the kind that starts in the heart and takes its time reaching the face. It was her first smile since arriving in Italy. In that small bunker, surrounded by crumbling walls and weary souls, something shifted. Not the war, that would go on, but between them, between Arthur and Teresa, there was now a space for something else, a beginning. Not because they were sure of the future, but because, for the first time, they weren't afraid to imagine one. The sky was heavy that morning, painted in gray clouds and the quiet threat of rain. It was the kind of silence that felt sacred, as if even the war had paused to listen. The ceremony took place in what was left of a countryside church, its roof long gone, windows shattered, and walls leaning like tired shoulders. But the spirit of the place still stood, And that was enough. Arthur and Teresa stood in front of the altar, or what remained of it. Behind them, wildflowers had begun to grow through cracks in the stone. The only decoration was a piece of cloth draped over broken wood, and yet somehow it felt grand. The priest was Polish, like Arthur, an old man with a bandaged arm and a cane made from a bent bayonet. He leaned on it carefully, each movement slow but full of purpose. He had seen too much, just like the couple before him. Teresa wore a simple dress and a white scarf tied gently around her head. It had belonged to her mother. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, as if her past was reaching forward to bless her future. Arthur wore the same torn uniform he'd worn for weeks. No medals, no shine, just a small olive branch pinned near his heart, symbol of a peace he'd never truly known, but still hoped for. Around them stood soldiers from all sides, some leaning on crutches, others sitting on crates, their eyes full of memories. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They simply watched, as if witnessing something too rare to disturb. A French corporal sat in the back, his fingers wrapped in white bandages, gently pressing the keys of an old accordion. The melody he played was soft and broken, like a lullaby sung by someone who hadn't slept in years. When the time came, the priest asked Teresa if she would stay, through storms and stillness, through silence and sound. She looked at Arthur, her eyes calm, steady. "Yes," she said. And in that exact moment, something unexpected happened. The old bell, high above the broken rafters and untouched for months, began to sway with the wind. It rang once, loud and clear. No one touched it. No rope pulled it. It simply moved. No one dared to explain. But somehow, everyone understood. It was as if the earth itself had whispered its blessing. As if the past, the fallen, and the forgotten had gathered just out of sight to witness this one fragile moment of hope. There were no flowers, no photos, no written vows, only hearts caring too much and hands holding on anyway. And in the heart of war, surrounded by ruins, they found something stronger than destruction. They found each other. They called it a village, but it was barely more than a handful of stone houses clinging to the side of a hill. Walls still bore the scars of gunfire, and the fields had not yet healed. But for the first time in months, the air was still. The war had passed, for now, and the ground belonged once again to the living. In that quiet place, liberated by the Allies, Teresa began to build something different. Not with bricks or hammers, but with pages, words, and memory. She set up a small archive center in the back of an old bakery, between stacked crates of supplies and rifles leaning against the wall. Her desk was a table made from doors. Her shelves were empty ammunition boxes now filled with letters, files, and notebooks. But what she built wasn't just an archive. It became something much deeper. It became a heart. Soldiers came in shy at first, unsure of what to say. Many hadn't written home in months. Some never had. Teresa welcomed each of them the same way, with a soft smile, a cup of tea if there was any, and a question that sounded more like a lifeline. "Who do you want to write to?" Private Manuel Reyes, a young man from the Philippines, sat in silence for nearly an hour before writing his first letter to his daughter. He had carried her photo in his helmet since the day he left home, but had never found the words to reach her. That day, with Teresa's help, he did. Then there was a Scottish soldier, tough, quiet, eyes like winter. He brought in a letter from his fiancée, folded and stained. He had never told anyone he couldn't read it. Teresa didn't laugh. She sat beside him, taught him letter by letter. By the end of the week, he read it aloud, every word clear and proud. She also taught them to document names of those who had fallen, to keep diaries, to hold on to the truth, not just for themselves, but for the families waiting across oceans. Arthur watched her work from a distance at first, then found himself drawn in. Between patrols, supply runs, and helping civilians escape dangerous zones, he returned to the archive like a man coming home. At night, they sat together by candlelight. Sometimes he read fragments of old letters aloud, words from soldiers who had come and gone. Other times, he helped her organize lists of the missing, hoping that one name, his brother's, might one day appear. There were no walls to protect them, no warm bed, no safety, but in those small hours, surrounded by maps, books, and folded pages. They found something rare. They found comfort. And slowly, almost without realizing, they built a home. Not in the traditional sense. There were no keys, no address, no front door. But there was trust. There was purpose. There was love in quiet, steady ways. Among rifles and ration tins, bullet shells and olive branches, they created something war could not erase. A place to remember, a place to heal, a place to belong. The warning came too late. Dark clouds gathered above the hills like a curtain being drawn over the sky, but the command dismissed it. Just rain, they said, nothing to worry about. But when the storm hit, it wasn't just rain. It was a fury that tore through the mountains with no mercy. Rivers overflowing, roads vanishing in mud, wind howling like a wounded beast. One of the convoys didn't make the turn. A truck heavy with supplies and children from a nearby orphanage skidded off the narrow road and vanished down a steep incline. Panic followed. Orders flew in every direction. Men ran, stumbled, called out into the storm. Arthur was among them, boots slipping in the mud, heart racing. But before he could reach the edge, someone else was already moving. It was Teresa. She had climbed into a rusted old Jeep with no headlights, no working radio, and tires that barely held air. Her hands trembled as she turned the ignition. But her face was steel. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for help. She drove straight into the storm. No map, no visibility, just instinct, memory, and something deeper. Something colder and stronger than fear. A kind of courage that comes only when you've already lost everything worth losing and choose to fight anyway. The hills were a maze of mud and broken trees, but Teresa found them. The truck had crashed sideways into a ravine. The driver was unconscious. Water was rising. 2 children clung to the frame, their voices lost in the roar of rain. She waded through waist-deep water, climbed into the wreckage, and pulled them out one by one. Small hands shaking bodies, wide eyes filled with terror. She found the soldier slumped behind the wheel and dragged him free too, arm over her shoulder, step by painful step. When she returned hours later, soaked to the bone and caked in mud, her face told the whole story. She had stared into something dark and come back from it. Her hands were scratched. Her heart was pounding so hard she couldn't speak. But her eyes burned with life, with the fire of someone who had faced the storm and refused to let it take what mattered. Arthur didn't say a word. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as the rain softened around them. There was nothing else to do. No medal to give, no speech to make, because some moments speak for themselves. And in that embrace, mud-streaked, shivering, silent, was everything. Gratitude, awe, love, and the unspoken truth that Teresa had become more than anyone imagined. Not just a witness to war, but a force within it. The war was almost over, but the silence that hung in the air wasn't relief. It was the kind of quiet that comes when hearts are too full to speak. That evening, Arthur and Teresa sat beneath a torn canvas, its edges flapping softly in the breeze. Around them were stacks of old letters, crumpled maps, and a few books saved from the chaos. They didn't need much. The company of one another was enough. It was Teresa who broke the silence first. She spoke slowly, almost as if reading from a book she knew by heart. She told him about the fire that had consumed the library back in Valparaiso, about the night the flames danced across the shelves, and how she had rushed inside to save whatever she could. She spoke of the long journey that followed, crossing the Andes with nothing but a pack of books on her back and stories in her soul. And then of the people she met, the friends she made, the ones who never came home from the Eastern Front. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. Arthur listened without interrupting. Then when she finally grew quiet, he told her something he hadn't said to anyone, not even his own men. He had found his brother. After years of silence, after believing the worst, a name appeared on a list, scrawled in pencil, almost forgotten. His brother had been held in a Nazi camp and had survived long enough to be rescued. He was alive. Arthur cried, not loudly, not with shaking shoulders or sobs, just quiet tears running down a face that had long forgotten how to let go. For the first time in years, he allowed the weight to fall. Teresa didn't say anything. She just placed her hand over his. Later that night, under the flickering light of a lantern, she handed him something small, a gift wrapped in a scrap of cloth. He unfolded it slowly, unsure of what to expect. It was a chess piece, a pawn, carved by hand from a piece of old ammunition crate wood. It was rough around the edges, a little crooked, but beautiful in its simplicity, a token of patience, of resilience, of battles fought not with weapons, but with heart. Arthur turned it over in his fingers, speechless. Teresa smiled and said softly, "Checkmate," then added even quieter, "And thank you for not giving up on me." In that moment, beneath a battered tarp in the shadow of so many yesterdays, they didn't feel like survivors. They felt like two people who had come through the fire together. Scarred, yes, but not broken, never broken. After the war, the battlefield grew quiet, but not empty. In the same shelter that once held fear and pain, new life slowly began to take root. The crates of ammunition were gone. In their place stood shelves with books, tables with pencils, and walls covered in drawings made by children who had never seen peace until now. Teresa transformed the space into a learning center. At night, by lantern light, she taught the children of soldiers to read. She didn't just teach letters, she taught stories, hope, the belief that even in broken places, something good could grow again. Arthur worked the land just outside the building, side by side with a group of men who had returned from the front change. Some bore scars they couldn't hide. Others carried wounds no one could see. Together, they planted vegetables, herbs, and sunflowers. At first, nothing grew. The earth was hard, the rain was shy, but they didn't give up. Then one morning, yellow petals began to rise from the ashes. Delicate, bright, defiant. Flowers blooming in a place the world had once left behind. On the day they renewed their vows, Teresa wore a simple blue dress she had found in a market in Naples. It had no embroidery, no lace, but when she walked through the doors of the center, surrounded by children, veterans, and survivors, it looked like something made of light. Arthur stood beside her, quiet as always, but when he looked out over the field of sunflowers, he spoke words he had been carrying for a long time. "Maybe God doesn't stop wars," he said softly, "but sometimes he plants flowers among the ruins." And maybe that's what their story truly was. Not about battles or victory, but about what comes after. About choosing to stay, choosing to rebuild, and daring to believe that love, even when born in the darkest places, can still create light. Did you already know this story? What would you have done in Arthur's place? What other stories of courage, sacrifice, and healing should be remembered? Your thoughts matter, and your voice helps keep these memories alive. If this story moved you, don't let it be forgotten. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this one. Together, we can make sure that the legacy of these heroes lives on, not just in history books, but in every heart that chooses to remember. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and never stop looking for the flowers that grow where no one expects them.